Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking here today on behalf of Amnesty International regarding the Rohingya refugee crisis. The Rohingya refugees are victims of forced migration due to religious persecution. In a largely Buddhist nation, the Rohingya Muslims were unwanted and unwelcome. The Burmese government repeatedly disqualified their ethnic status and instead labeled them as Bengali migrants. Thus, they were unable to find work or become citizens. They were restricted in marriage, prevented from traveling beyond their village, and prohibited from building or maintaining religious structures and voting. They have experienced countless losses as a people, but perhaps most dramatic is their status as a people with no state. When the Burmese military and Buddhist extremists became forceful, the Rohingyas fled. According to the UNHCR, more than 120,000 attempted to escape Burma by sea. Many boat people from Myanmar and Bangladesh, many thought to be Rohingyas, have been rescued off the coast of Indonesia and Malaysia. Thousands of Rohingya were discovered to be adrift in the Andaman Sea. The United Nations had to issue a call to rescue the thousands adrift, while the Burmese government sat idly by and watched. Several other Asian nations accepted some, while forcing others to remain stranded. This is despite the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, declaring a duty to rescue people in distress at sea. Forced migration can and often does lead to other human rights issues like human trafficking. Trafficking victims are more likely to come from countries high in poverty, violence, and corruption, such as Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa, and Latin America. In 2015, refugee Marma Ismai, a young Rohingya boy, was intercepted by traffickers en route to Malaysia. After his family paid the initial ransom, the traffickers demanded more money for the boy's safe release. To date, there is no word on Marma Ismai's freedom. In 1999, nearly 20 years prior to this Rohingya refugee crisis, the UN called upon the government of Burma to establish a constructive dialogue with the United Nations system, including the human rights mechanisms for the effective promotion and protection of human rights in the country, and to consider becoming a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and the Convention relating to the status of refugees and its protocol. Burma is a party to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, the Geneva Conventions of 12 August 1949 on the protection of war victims, the Forced Labor Convention of 1930, and the Freedom of Association and Protection of the Rights to Organize Convention. Yet none of these laws or conventions have done anything to help the Rohingya, as Burma does not consider the Rohingya as citizens, nor has it offered them a clear path to citizenship. Instead, Burma has utilized their military force to force the Rohingyas from their home with reported cases of murder, beatings, and rape. While the Burmese government has denied these claims, the Rohingya have fled and fear any attempts or opportunities to return them to Burma. High-ranking military officials have said that such claims are destroying the honor of Burma. I ask the UN, what honor is there in forcing the Rohingya from their homelands? What honor is there in religious persecution? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, what is shocking here is not just the persecution of the Rohingya, but how long those who knew about it could remain passive. The UN was created as the world's way of saying never again to the genocide perpetuated by the Nazis. And yet here we are, realizing once again how close the Rohingyas came to the same fate. The UN itself calling this a genocide, or almost. The UN stepped in only after countless refugees decided to save themselves and arrived in Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. Yet now the UN chooses a wait-and-see tactic to see if Burma will live up to their promises once more. The UN has recommended that those in charge of displacing the Rohingya be charged with the gravest crimes under the international law. Yet instead, those who should be charged are rallying contempt for the UN and other agencies who have stepped in to help the Rohingya refugees. Just last year, the UN signed a deal with the Burmese government to resettle some 700,000 Rohingya refugees who had fled from the country to neighboring Bangladesh. The UN nor Burma have made the contents of that deal public to the press nor the Rohingya refugees. I urge the UN to make that document public so that the very people impacted may have a say in their future. Bangladesh currently houses more than 900,000 refugees, indicating that even more Rohingya have made the journey from an unsafe Burma. Unsurprising when you consider that none of those responsible have been charged with any wrongdoing, which begs the question, is Burma really going to provide the refugees with a safe place to call home? Can we trust them to keep the Rohingya safe after nearly 80 years of persecution and oppression? If so, when will the resettlement begin? How much longer must these people remain stateless refugees? The international community must take note that the clock is ticking. The plight of the Rohingya is not over, it has just been relocated. Many countries feel that their national sovereignty has been compromised by the escalating numbers of asylum seekers attempting to gain entry across their borders. Bangladesh is no exception. The political climate in Bangladesh indicates that the Rohingya are growing unwelcome. Bangladesh plans to build more shelters in the Cox's Bazar area, but also wants to limit their travel to allocated areas, just like Burma once did. Political candidates have vowed to deport Rohingya refugees. BJP President Amit Shah said the Modi government would throw all infiltrators out of the country before the end of the second term of the Modi government, and compared Rohingya refugees to termites. In their new camps, the Rohingya have begun to find their voice. Several have become prominent political leaders amongst the refugees. Several others have taken a more radicalized approach. Many fear this unrest could provide terrorist organizations with able-bodied Rohingyas if a resolution is not fast. I urge the UN to issue sanctions for the Burmese actions which led to this crisis. I urge the UN to issue sanctions to the various nations who refused aid to the Rohingyas who were distressed at sea. And I urge the UN to secure a legitimate resolution for the Rohingyas, because Burma has shown us time and time again that they do not honor the deals in which they enter.